Hello everyone, Mr. Cross here. Hope everyone's well. Today's lessons are about how the Nazis control people through fear and propaganda. I'm going to take you through a couple of lessons, one on terror, one on propaganda, and from the end of it the idea will be that you produce a couple of diagrams, one on terror and one on propaganda. Then after you finish those diagrams and revise those diagrams, I've got a couple of ideas for you to have a go at. Then you have a go at the quiz on Show My Homework to show your understanding. And remember, if the first time you do the quiz it doesn't go too well, so maybe you get only 50–60%, please don't just keep having a go at it. Go back to your revision notes, go back to your diagrams, learn those sections that you didn't do so well in, and then have another go. And what hopefully you'll find then is your scores will increase. So we're going to recall and describe some of the different types of propaganda. We're going to explain how they use these forms of propaganda, and then to a degree we'll assess the effectiveness of the propaganda. It's all part of the big question, the inquiry just here in the corner. What made it so hard to oppose Nazi rule? So this just illustrates the section that we're going to be looking at. So last week you were looking at this section here on dictatorship. So in fact we've been doing that for 2 weeks now. So you did some revision on it, you did a Show My Homework quiz on it, or you should have done, and you should have also submitted a paragraph to answer a 7-mark question. And thanks so much for those people that have already submitted those. Got some really good answers. I mean, really blown away by the amount of people that get in near full marks on that, so it really bodes well, so thank you very much to those people. And I will always give you feedback, you know, usually on the same day if not the day afterwards, and hopefully you're finding that quite useful. But today we're going to do Unit 2, which is all about control and opposition. We won't be doing this bottom section today, we just haven't quite got time to get that done this week, so we're going to do that in one of hopefully the sessions that you'll be coming along to, where we'll be welcoming you back to school. So we're really looking forward to that, and hopefully those people that do come in will really benefit from some extra support when you're in school. If you're not in school, for whatever reason that may be, then we will be still doing these YouTube videos and giving you all the resources to try and do it at home, but I think you'll find it really useful to be in school if you can. So the carrot and stick approach, hopefully some of you remember this from your studies in Year 9. It was a way in which myself and other teachers helped to explain how both propaganda and terror worked together to control Germany. So you might want to pause it now and have a think about those different approaches, maybe just try and go over in your head or note down what you can remember about propaganda and terror, and then I'm going to go through now and reveal some of my ideas on this topic. So you revised last lesson how Hitler and the Nazis took over and created a dictatorship and consolidated power, but that doesn't mean that everyone was a wholehearted Nazi supporter at this time. It's important to understand that, because that's the starting point for a lot of the stuff that you do on propaganda terror, and in fact for the rest of the unit it's really important to understand that when Hitler came to power not everybody supported him, and in actual fact this is a good statistic to remember, in the last election that they had before there were no more elections because he passed the Enabling Act and didn't need any more elections anymore, but in the last one he got 33% of the vote. Now that they were the most popular party, but there's still obviously a whole lot of people in the country that are unconvinced about Hitler and the Nazis, so it's really important to understand that. So, how then did Hitler exert so much power over the lives of Germans between 1933 to 39? If only 33% of Nazis were wholehearted Nazi supporters at the beginning, and you might even argue that some of them voted because they were scared, even at that point, how was it then in 33 to 39 that he had almost a total grip on German society? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the answer is through the carrot and stick approach. Have a think if you can remember what that was. So there's a nice video here which is a bit of an introduction. It shows you terror and propaganda, the stick and the carrot. So the carrot is kind of the incentives and the Nazis trying to make out that they were the party for the people, but if those things didn't work, they always had the stick approach if people stepped out of line, and that was the terror. So as you watch this video, just bullet point as many examples of terror and propaganda as you can in the T table. Pause the video at certain points when you need to write a few more bits, but don't try and write everything. It's a really important skill at GCSE that you don't just write every single thing that you see. It's not the most effective method of revising. So I've given an example there of terror from the video that you'll watch just now, and I've just put SS. I've said who they were, that they were Hitler's bodyguards and security force, and then just a little bit about their responsibilities. So they were responsible for the concentration camps, and they had a huge part to play in the Night of the Long Knives. Okay, so I've not written everything that they say on the video, I've just put the key points in there. Okay, so watch the video, draw the table. You don't need to submit this. Please don't feel the need to email me with the table. The stuff that you have to send to me will be later on in the lesson. Okay, but keep it safe, keep it in your whatever you're using at the moment, your book, your folder, just so you've got it to refer to. So on to one of our first revision diagrams. So a different approach to this one. We're not doing a mind map or revision cards and things like that we've maybe previously looked at. This is really just to show you that you can be quite creative with these things, and when you're creative, quite often it makes it more memorable. So you're going to focus on terror for the rest of this lesson. So using your notes and knowledge organiser, which I'll show you on the next slide. You're going to create a diagram showing how the Nazis control people through fear by sticking your TV remote control, or you just draw it in the middle of your page. Just a basic remote control will do. If you want to use kind of the Sky format, it's quite useful because it's got some buttons that you can really use, like the red button's quite useful, the record button. Be quite creative with those. And around the remote, you're going to think about which button you would use for different ways the Nazis controlled through fear. So I've got some examples here. So you might, for the on-off button, put which one you think is the most feared. Okay, so I'll put an example actually on there, around here at the top. There, the on-off button, people mostly feared the Gestapo, and you don't need to say that the Gestapo was the most feared, but if you do, and then you could maybe explain why. The volume up button, which I think is just here, it's a bit smaller than mine, just there. You might put the fear tactic, which could get increased or get worse. Okay, the pause button, the one that changed the most possibly. But there's loads of other. You've got a red button there, that could be really like terrifying. But you've got some numbers where you can maybe add some statistics on there as well. You've obviously got the record button. Maybe you could think about some of the different methods in which they use to, monitor people. So things like tapping phones, opening mail, things like that. So there's loads and loads of things that you can be creative with, and that should be quite an interesting way of doing it. Okay, so I want you to try and include Himmler and the SS on your diagram. The Intelligence Gathering Service, which was the SD, that's the Secret Service, that's led by Heydrich. The Gestapo, police and judges, and courts and concentration camps. Okay, and remembering that concentration camps at this time were not used to house just Jewish people, and in fact it's really only 1938 when we start to see Jewish people in large numbers being sent to concentration camps, and that's after Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. In fact, the concentration camps were mainly used at this point for political opponents, particularly at the beginning communists, but really any political opponents during this period. And they weren't extermination camps, remember, at this point. That comes during the Second World War. We're focusing at the moment on 1933 to 39. So 33 is when Hitler comes to power, 39 is the start of the Second World War. Okay. So here's the knowledge organiser for you to use. So you've got, I would start reading it from, well, you've obviously got the title, so what made it so hard to oppose. You've got a bit of context there. Okay, there's a slightly different figure there where it says Nazis received 43.9% of the popular vote. Well, that is true, but there were numerous elections. The last election that they had was 33%, so that's the one that I always use because I think it best illustrates the fact that a lot of people weren't wholehearted supporters. So I just wanted to explain that discrepancy between figures. You will find that quite a lot actually between different history books anyway, and you know, so don't fret too much when you see in one book it says one figure and one the other. It's absolutely fine, and as long as your figure is in the ballpark, then you'll be fine anyway. Examiners aren't going to be searching different sources to find out whether your fact is exactly right or not, as long as it's within the ballpark. So we've got a section here on Himmler. We've got the intelligence gathering section. Remember that was the SD, and that's Heydrich who led that one. Okay. We've got the Gestapo. That's going to be quite important for when we look at a particular type of question actually, so it's quite important there that you have a look at the Gestapo. Then we've got police, judges and courts, just there, and concentration camps, just there. Okay. So here's an example of what it might look like. So you've got your remote control in the middle. I've put some examples there that you could use. I've done some sentence starters. So look how I've used the numbers on here for different facts. The terror, stop or pause opposition, just there. So it just gives you a few ideas, but be creative. That doesn't have to be how it is. Again, this isn't something that you necessarily have to send to me, but if you do something that's particularly creative that you're proud of, then please send it to me, and I can get it on Twitter, or I could even put it on Show My Homework so other people can use it as a bit of a guide. So it is quite useful if you do send me them, but don't feel like you have to send me these revision diagrams. There is other things that you will need to send to me. Okay, once you have complete the diagram, revise it using the knowledge organiser, and then move on to the terror lesson. Only after doing both of these do I want you to have a go at this week's Show My Homework quiz. So the second lesson is on the carrot approach. So in the last activity you focused on how the Nazis controlled Germans through terror. Now you're going to look at how they used propaganda. You've already watched one video which gives you some examples. That was on slide 4 if you want to go back and remind yourself of that, or maybe you forgot to do that the first time. The next slide has a propaganda knowledge organiser like the terror one. This time I want you to produce a mind map showing the different aspects of propaganda, and I've done an example for you of one branch, and it's shown on slide 11. After you've done all of this, revise your mind map, learn it. One of the things you could do is maybe cover up your mind map or turn it over, and then try and write as much as you can from memory, and then compare the two mind maps, and if there's any gaps, go back to your original mind map, learn those bits and have a go at it again. That way you'll know 100% sure whether you can remember that information or not, and then when you are feeling really confident about knowing as much as you can do about propaganda and terror, that's the point in which you should have a go at the Show My Homework quiz, and then you should be starting to score quite highly right from the beginning, instead of maybe getting 3 or 4 the first time round and then just by trial and error ended up on 6 and 7. What I'm really looking for is those people that are getting, 90% or above right from the beginning. That shows to me that you've really learned it and revised it before doing the quiz. So here's the knowledge organiser for propaganda, pretty similar format. So Himmler was the important person for terror, but propaganda is Joseph Goebbels just there. And then around the page, you've essentially got some different forms of propaganda. So you've got radio in the bottom corner just there. You've got films, you've got posters, you've got rallies, and you've got the Berlin Olympics. So you've got some good examples there of propaganda. So this is the example that I was talking about. So I've done it on the computer, so it's actually easier when you handwrite it, I think. But I've done it on the computer. Feel free just to get an A3 piece of paper if you can. And the idea is, we've done these before, in the middle you've got the topic, so I put Nazi propaganda. I think it's important you put the years here because we are focusing on before the Second World War. I've done an image and I've chosen a carrot because that reminds me of the carrot and stick approach, which I think is quite important. And then really around it, what you want is the different forms of propaganda. So I've done newspapers, but also you need to think about posters, rallies, radio, Olympics and film, and maybe just try and at least do 4 branches in total. If you can do all of them, I think that's obviously a lot better. So for this one, you notice that I've not written an awful lot. Well, you don't need to, because you will have done your work. You've already gone through it in lessons. We've already revised it several times. So you don't need to write everything. So try and be confident and just think, okay, so it's about newspapers. So I've put newspapers. I've just done a picture of a newspaper to remind me. Then I've thought, okay, well, there's 2 elements to this. There's how they controlled the press themselves, and then how they controlled the content. So I've just done 2 branches to show that. How did they control the newspapers? Well, they had something called a Reich Association of Press. I've not written everything about that because I know a little bit about it. If you don't know and you can't remember who the Reich Association of Press is, you might just do an additional branch just with a few words. Okay, and the Reich Association of Press was basically an organisation whereby all journalists had to sign up to. So it was a really easy way that the Nazis had of ensuring that the people that worked for the press would do as they were told. So you might just have a branch coming off that, or 2 branches just explaining that if you can't remember. And then they also closed all other opposition newspapers. So any, for example, in 1933 communist newspapers, they were closed down, and they were closed down right from the outset after the Reichstag fire, where they used the emergency decree to do so. So then there's the content. So how did they make sure the content was as they wanted it to be? Well, they owned some newspapers. So a good example of that was like the Der Stürmer. They didn't own other ones. And then they included within their own newspapers and within their own guidelines for the Reich Association of Press, different themes that they wanted to see. One of them was anti-Semitism, which was against Jewish people. But there were other themes as well that you might want to add to that. So things like anti-communism, Aryan supremacy, Hitler is shown as being godlike, and things like that you could add to. But I think there we've got enough, I think, for newspapers. And what I want you to do is use the knowledge organiser and your own knowledge and the video that you watched to have a go at doing at least 3 more branches. Again, if you produce something you're proud of, send it to me and to have a look at. I can give you a bit of feedback on it as well, which I'll always do. And then if it's really good, I'll put it on Twitter just so other people then can see it and use it as an example. And it's also a good way of showing how some of the brilliant work that you're getting up to at the moment, which some of you are.